The sun clawed at the earth, relentless, turning the plains into a cracked mosaic of dust and despair. Her boots scuffed against the brittle ground, each step a small rebellion against the weight dragging her down. The canteen hung limp at her hip, its last drops long gone, leaving only the bitter taste of rust in her mouth. Eliza's lips were chapped, splitting with every breath, and her eyes stung from the grit carried on the ceaseless wind. She was a shadow moving through a world that didn't care, cast out, left to wander. Her family's voices still sharp in her mind, their words like knives. "You're no daughter of ours." The horizon stretched endless, a mocking line that promised nothing but more of the same. Her knees trembled, threatening to give, but she pressed on, driven by a stubborn spark she couldn't name. A hawk screamed overhead, its cry swallowed by the vastness. She didn't look up. The weight of her shame was heavier than hunger, heavier than the sun itself. Her dress, once a pale blue, was now stained with the red dust of the Nebraska flats, torn at the hem where it caught on sagebrush. She'd walked for days, maybe 3, maybe 4 since the wagon left her behind. The memory of it burned, her father's back turned, her mother's eyes averted, the creak of wheels as they rolled west without her. Sinful, they'd called her, though the sin was only a whispered rumor, a boy's name they wouldn't speak. She'd begged, but their silence was louder. Now, the plains answered with their own indifference. Her stomach gnawed, a hollow ache that matched the one in her chest. She stumbled, catching herself on a rock, her palms scraping raw. The blood was warm, fleeting, the only thing that felt alive in the distance. A shape flickered through the heat haze, a dark smudge against the gold of dying grass. A house, maybe, or just another trick of the light. She squinted, her vision blurring, and took a step toward it. Her legs buckled, and the ground rushed up to meet her. The dirt was cool against her cheek, a cruel kind of mercy. She lay there, breath shallow, listening to the faint hum of insects, the pulse of her own heart. The world felt far away, like it was slipping through her fingers. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she saw her mother's hands calloused folding bread, dough, never touching her. The memory stung more than the fall. A shadow fell across her face, blocking the sun. She didn't move, didn't dare hope it was real. The sound came next, boots crunching, deliberate, slow. A man's voice, rough as gravel but soft with something she couldn't place, said, "You alive, girl?" She opened her eyes, squinting against the glare. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face half hidden under a hat's brim. Dust clung to his coat, and his hands were scarred, knuckles thick from work. He crouched, not too close, his eyes searching hers not with pity, but with a quiet curiosity, like he was reading a map. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry, words crumbling to nothing. He didn't wait for an answer. He reached for a canteen at his belt, the leather creaking, and held it out. "Drink slow," he said, his voice steady, like he'd seen this before, people broken by the land, left to its mercy. She took the canteen, her hands shaking, and sipped. The water was warm, tasting of earth, but it was life. She coughed, spilling some, and he didn't flinch, just watched. "Ain't no place to lie down and die," he said, standing, his shadow stretching long across her. "Kamar got a place not far." He didn't offer a hand, didn't crowd her, just waited, like the plains themselves, patient but unyielding. She pushed herself up, every muscle screaming, and followed. The house was real, a low, weathered thing of wood and sod, crouched against the wind. Smoke curled from its chimney, thin and gray like a prayer unanswered. He walked ahead, not looking back, trusting she'd keep up or fall behind. She chose to keep up, though each step felt like a betrayal of the girl she'd been, the one who believed in family, in forgiveness. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and the smell of wood smoke and coffee hit her, sharp and grounding. She stood, in the threshold, swaying, the world tilting again. He turned, his eyes catching hers, and for the first time, she saw something like recognition, not of her, but of the weight she carried. The house was small, its walls rough-hewn, patched with mud where the wind had clawed gaps. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and something burgers maybe, or the faint tang of livestock carried in on his boots. Eliza stood just inside the door, her hands clasped tight to keep them from shaking. The floor creaked under her weight, and she felt exposed, like a deer caught in a clearing. The man moved to a stove in the corner, its iron belly glowing faintly red. He didn't speak, just set a kettle on, the clink of metal loud in the quiet. A single chair sat by a table, its surface scarred with knife marks, and a narrow cot hugged the far wall, blankets folded with a soldier's precision. No pictures, no softness, just function, like the man himself. She swayed, catching herself on the doorframe, her vision blurred again, the edges of the room softening. The memory came unbidden, her brother's face, pale and pinched, as he handed her the canteen before the wagon rolled away. "Don't come back," he'd said, his voice breaking, not with anger but with shame. She'd reached for him, but he'd turned, his shadow swallowed by the dust. Now, in this stranger's house, that moment felt like a wound reopened. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, the wood cool against her palms. The man glanced over, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't rush to her. Instead, He pulled a tin cup from a shelf, poured something steaming, and set it on the table. "Sit," he said, not unkindly. "You'll fall again otherwise." She crawled to the chair, pride be damned, and pulled herself up. The cup was warm in her hands, the coffee bitter and strong, burning a path down her throat. It steadied her, if only a little. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her with that same quiet curiosity. His face was weathered, lines carved deep around his eyes, but they weren't hard not yet. "Name's Caleb," he said finally. "This is my place, ain't much, but it's mine." He paused, waiting, but she didn't offer her name. Not yet. The word felt too heavy, like giving it would mean surrendering something she wasn't ready to lose. Her mind drifted again, to the boy who'd started it all. Thomas, with his soft hands and promises whispered under the cottonwood tree. He'd said he'd marry her, said they'd build a life. But when the rumors spread, he'd vanished, leaving her to face the family's wrath alone. Her father's belt, her mother's silence, the preacher's sermons about shame they'd all pressed down until she was nothing but a stain they wanted gone. She blinked, and the room came back into focus. Caleb was still there, waiting. "You got a name?" he asked again. Softer this time, like he knew the cost of answering Eliza. She said, the words scraping her throat. It felt like a confession. He nodded, as if it was enough, and turned back to the stove. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but heavy, like the air before a storm. She sipped the coffee, her hands steadier now, and studied the room. A rifle hung above the door, its barrel gleaming faintly in the firelight. A single window let in the last of the day's light, painting the walls gold and shadow. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the glass, and she thought of the plains, vast and unforgiving, waiting to swallow her again. Caleb set a plate before her, bread hard and plain, and a strip of dried meat. "Eat," he said, and she did, tearing into it with a hunger that shamed her. He didn't watch, just busied himself with the fire, giving her the dignity of her need. When she finished, he spoke again. "You can stay tonight. Barnes got a cot straw to keep warm. After that, we'll see." It wasn't kindness, not exactly just a practical sort of mercy, like he'd offered the canteen. She nodded, too tired to argue, too broken to hope. The coffee was gone now, the cup cold in her hands. She stared at it, tracing the dents with her thumb, and wondered if this was what survival felt like, empty but alive. Outside, the wind sang its lonesome song, and the house creaked in answer. She thought of the wagon, the dust. Her brothers turned back. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but the coffee's warmth lingered, a small defiance against the cold. Caleb banked the fire, the embers glowing like eyes in the dark. She followed him to the barn, her steps surer now, the ground less eager to claim her. The barn smelled of hay and horse, a dry, earthy scent that wrapped around her like a rough blanket. Eliza lay on the cot, straw pricking through the thin mattress, her body aching in ways she hadn't known it could. The wind whispered through cracks in the walls, carrying the low moan of cattle in the distance. She stared at the rafters, shadows, dancing from a lantern's faint glow, and let the exhaustion pull her under. Sleep came in fragment streams of wagon wheels churning dust, her mother's face blurred by tears, Thomas's hand slipping from hers. She woke before dawn, and trembling, the cold seeping into her bones like regret. Caleb was already up when she stepped outside, the sky a bruised purple, stars fading like forgotten promises. He was by the corral, his breath fogging in the chill, saddling a horse with deliberate motions. The animal snorted, stamping a hoof, and he murmured something low, calming. She watched from the barn door, her arms wrapped tight against the morning bite. He glanced her way, nodded once, then swung into the saddle. "Chores," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Help if you can, or don't." The horse turned, and he rode out toward the fields, leaving her with the quiet. She moved slow, testing her strength. The well pump groaned as she worked it, water splashing cold into a bucket. Her hand stung, the scrapes from yesterday raw, but the pain grounded her. She carried the bucket to the trough, the horses watching with dark, unblinking eyes. One nudged her shoulder, soft and insistent, and she froze, the touch unexpected. It snorted again, warm breath on her neck, and she poured the water, watching it ripple. The act felt foreign, like barring someone else's life. Back home, chores had been punishment, scrubbing floors while her family ate, their silence louder than words. Here, it was just necessity, no judgment in the air. By midday, the sun climbed high, baking the ground anew. Caleb returned at dusk, leading the horse to the barn. He didn't speak, just handed her a pitchfork and nodded to the stalls. She took it, the wood rough against her palms, and started mucking, the rhythm pulling her thoughts away from the ache in her chest. Sweat beaded on her forehead, mixing with grit, and for the first time in days, hunger wasn't the only thing gnawing at her. Memories flickered, her father's voice, sharp as a whip. "You've shamed us all." She stabbed the pitchfork harder, straw flying, until her arms burned. He worked beside her, silent but present, his movements efficient, like he'd done this 1,000 times alone. When they finished, he wiped his hands on his pants and looked at her. really looked, his eyes tracing the lines of her face. "You know horses?" he asked, breaking the quiet. She shook her head, the admission feeling like weakness. "Learn, then," he said, and led her to the corral. The horse stood patient as he showed her how to approach. Slow, hand out, let it smell you. Her fingers trembled as she touched its muzzle, velvet soft, and something in her chest loosened. Just a fraction. Supper was simple beans and cornbread, eaten at the table in the house. The fire crackled, casting flickering light on the walls, and the wind outside had died to a murmur. She ate carefully, aware of his eyes on her now and then. "What happened?" he asked finally, not prying, just stating it like fact. She set her spoon down, the metal clinking soft. The words stuck, but the quiet demanded them. "Family," she said, voice low. "They didn't want me no more." He nodded, like he understood, and didn't push. But his silence invited more, and she found herself speaking of Thomas, the promises broken, the wagon fading into dust. Her voice cracked on the last, and she looked away, shame burning hot. Caleb stared into his cup, the coffee gone cold. "Lost my wife 2 years back," he said after a long pause, his words measured. "Fever took her land, don't care about grief, just keeps on." It wasn't comfort, not exactly just truth, raw and shared. She met his eyes then, seeing the weariness there, mirrored in her own. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and the moment hung between them, fragile as smoke. Days blurred into a routine rising with the light, tending the animals, mending fences under the relentless sun. Her body hardened, muscles aching less, calluses forming where blisters had been. Caleb taught her small things, how to read the sky for storms, how to mend a harness with steady stitches. He didn't crowd her, gave her space like the plains gave horizon. But in the evenings, by the fire, words came easy as stories of his travels west, her childhood on the farm before it soured. Laughter crept in once, low and surprising, when a calf butted her leg and she stumbled. It felt like betrayal, this easing, like forgetting the hurt that brought her here, yet tension coiled beneath it all. She caught herself watching him, his hands, strong and scarred, the way he paused at dusk, staring west as if waiting for something lost. Trust came slow, like rain and drought, but doubt lingered. What if he turned her out, like they had? The thought gnawed at night, in the barn's dark, the straw whispering secrets. One afternoon, thunder rumbled distant, clouds gathering like bruises. She stood in the field, fork in hand, feeling the first drops. Caleb rode up, hat low, and extended a hand. "Storm cumin," he said. She hesitated, then took it, his grip firm, pulling her up behind him. The horse moved, sure, rain starting to fall, and she held on, the world blurring wet. It was the first touch she'd allowed, and it burned like promise. ***. The rain came down in sheets, drumming on the barn roof like fingers tapping impatient. Eliza clung to Caleb's back as the horse plodded through the mud, her arms around his waist, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. His shirt was soaked, clinging to his skin, and the scent of wet earth and leather filled her lungs. Lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the plains in stark white, and thunder rolled close, vibrating through her chest. She pressed her cheek against his shoulder, the fabric rough, and for a moment, the world narrowed to that contact, warm, solid, against the chaos. They reached the barn, and he slid down first, turning to offer his hand again. She took it, her fingers slipping in his calluses, meeting Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp hay and animals shifting uneasy. He shook the water from his hat, droplets scattering like beads, and lit a lantern, its glow pushing back the shadows. "Dry off," he said, handing her a blanket. From a shelf, coarse wool that scratched but warmed. She wrapped it around herself, watching as he tended the horse, rubbing it down with slow, sure strokes, murmuring low. The storm raged outside, wind howling through the eaves, but in here, it felt contained, like a breath held. That night, she didn't sleep in the cot. The thunder kept her awake, and when a particularly loud crack shook the walls, she found herself at the house door, knocking soft. Caleb opened it, shirtless, his hair tousled, eyes heavy with sleep. He didn't ask, just stepped aside, and she entered, the fire's embers casting a faint red on the floor. She sat by the hearth, blanket tight, and he joined her, adding wood, until flames licked up again. The warmth seeped in, chasing the chill, and silence settled, broken only by the pop of sap. Her mind wandered to Thomas, his kisses under the stars, sweet but fleeting, leaving her hollow. Caleb's presence was different, heavier, like the land itself. "You ever think of leaving?" she asked, voice barely above the rain. He stared into the fire, shadows dancing on his face. "Every day," he said. "But where to? This is what I know." He paused, then added, softer, "She wanted more townspeople. I couldn't give it." His wife, unspoken before but now a ghost in the room. Eliza felt a pang, not jealousy, but kinship, the ache of loss, of being not enough. She shifted closer, the blanket brushing his arm, and he didn't pull away. The storm eased to a drizzle, and sleep came there. On the floor, heads bowed near, weeks turned the land golden. grass ripening under a milder sun. Eliza moved from barn to house, her things a spare dress mended with his thread, a comb carved from bone-finding places on shelves. She learned the rhythm of the ranch, branding calves, their balls sharp in the air, smoke from the iron biting her nose, harvesting the small garden, dirt under nails, tomatoes bursting warm on her tongue. Caleb's touches grew a hand on her shoulder to steady her on a ladder, fingers brushing as he passed tools. Each one sent a spark, unfamiliar but not unwelcome, thawing the ice in her veins, but doubt crept like weeds. One morning post-rider came, dust trailing his horse, a letter in hand. Caleb took it, his face tightening as he read, then tucked it away without a word. She saw the envelope later, peeking from his pocket, feminine script, a name she didn't know. Her stomach twisted, memories flooding, her mother's letters to kin, full of judgment, sealing her fate. Was this his past calling? That night, by the fire, she couldn't sit still, pacing the floorboards that creaked like accusations. Who's the letter from? She asked, words sharper than intended. He looked up, eyes guarded. Sister, wants me to sell, move east. The fire snapped, and she felt the pull, the safety of leaving, the fear of staying. He set the letter down, reached for her hand across the table. But I ain't going. This place, ... It's home now. His thumb traced her knuckles, rough but gentle, and heat rose in her cheeks. The choice hung there. Pull back, guard the heart they'd shattered, or lean in, risk it breaking again. Outside, coyotes yelled a lonesome chorus, and the wind stirred, dust against the window. She didn't answer, just squeezed his hand, the gestures small but heavy. Sleep evaded her that night, the bed now shared feeling too vast. Dawn broke gray, clouds low, and she rose early, saddling a horse with hands that shook. The plains called, endless, a path back to nothing. But as she mounted, Caleb appeared at the door, hat in hand, eyes searching. Going somewhere? He asked, voice steady but edged with something raw. She gripped the reins, heart pounding like hooves on hard ground. Resist or risk, the words echoed in her mind, the air thick with unsaid things. Asterisk. The horse shifted beneath her, eager, and the horizon stretched, mocking as ever. Her family's voices whispered on the breeze, but fainter now, drowned by the memory of his touch, the shared silences. She dismounted, leading the horse back, and he met her halfway, no words needed. His arms folded around her, solid as the earth, and she let go, tears mixing with the scent of his skin. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, just a step, vulnerable, toward hope. Asterisk. Months passed like dust, settling after a wind, the plains turning from gold to brown under autumn's hand. Eliza woke each morning to the creak of the bedframe. Caleb's warmth beside her, his arm draped loose across her waist. The touch no longer startled her, it had become a quiet anchor, pulling her from dreams of abandonment to the solid now. She rose with the light filtering through the window, thin and pale, and set about the day, milking the cow in the chill air, her breath visible, fingers numb on the pail. The ranch demanded, and she gave, her body stronger now, shaped by the work. The scars on her hands faded to white lines. Caleb watched her sometimes, from the corral or the porch, his eyes soft in a way that made her chest tighten. They'd spoken little of the future, words unnecessary in the rhythm they'd built. Evenings brought them to the fire, her mending his shirt while he whittled a handle for a tool. The scrape of knife on wood a steady cadence. Laughter came easier, sparked by small things, a hen escaping the coop, feathers flying, or the way the dog chased its tail in circles. But beneath it, the past lingered, a shadow at the edges. She caught herself flinching at sudden noises, expecting rejection, and he'd pause, hand still, waiting for her to settle. One crisp morning, frost glittering on the grass like shattered glass, a rider appeared on the horizon, a dark speck growing against the pale sky. Eliza was in the garden, pulling the last carrots from the hard soil, dirt caking her nails. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, a knot forming in her gut. Caleb emerged from the barn, rifle in hand but loose at his side, his face set in lines she recognized, wary, protective. The rider drew near, horse lathered, and she saw the face, her brother, older now, beard unkempt, eyes hollow from the trail. He dismounted, slow, hat in hand, dust falling from his coat. Eliza, he said, voice cracking like dry earth. She froze, the carrots dropping from her grasp, rolling forgotten. Caleb stepped forward, a barrier unspoken, but she touched his arm, holding him back. Her brother's gaze flicked between them, taking in the house, the land, the way she stood tall now, not broken. Pa's gone, he said finally, words heavy. Fever, Ma wants you home, says she was wrong. The air thickened, the frost melting under the rising sun, drops pattering soft on leaves. Memories surged, the wagon's departure, her pleas swallowed by dust, the endless walk that led her here. Shame burned anew, mixed with anger, a fire she'd thought banked home. She echoed, voice steady but edged, this is home. Her brother shifted, boot scuffing, and pulled a letter from his pocket, paper creased and stained. She wrote this. Begs forgiveness. Eliza took it, fingers trembling, the script familiar, her mother's hand, once so withholding. Words blurred on the page, regret, loneliness, a plea to return. The knot tightened, pulling at the threads she'd woven here. Caleb stood silent, his presence a weight beside her, offering no counsel, just space for her choice. The brother waited, horse snorting impatient, the plains stretching indifferent. Beyond, resist or risk, the words thrummed in her veins. To go back meant facing the ghosts, perhaps healing, but leaving this, the man who'd given without asking. To stay meant turning away, letting the past die untended. She folded the letter, the paper crisp against her palm, and met her brother's eyes. "Tell Ma I'm sorry, but I ain't cumin." The words hung, final, and he nodded, mounting up without argument, riding away into the haze. The day blurred after, chores done in a fog, her mind churning like storm clouds. Evening found them on the porch, the sun dipping low, painting the sky in blood and gold. Caleb sat beside her, pipe smoke curling lazy, the scent sharp and familiar. "You could have gone," he said, not looking at her. She leaned against him, head on his shoulder. The wood creaking under their weight, could have, didn't want to. His arm came around her, pulling close, and the tension eased. A slow exhale. The stars emerged, pinpricks in the vast dark, and she felt the shift, not erasure of pain, but transformation. The shame reshaping into strength. Winter came harsh, snow blanketing the land in white silence, the wind howling like old griefs. They hunkered in, fire blazing, sharing warmth under quilts she'd sewn from scraps. Caleb fell ill once, fever burning hot, his breaths ragged. She tended him, cool cloths on his brow, broth spooned slow, fear clawing at her throat. Memories of his wife's loss hovered, but he pulled through, his hand squeezing hers, weak but sure. "Ain't leaving you," he murmured, and she believed it. The words a bomb. Spring thawed the ground, mud sucking at boots, new grass pushing green. Eliza planted seeds in the garden, fingers in soil, the earth yielding. Caleb built a cradle from pine, his knife carving smooth curves, unspoken hope in each stroke. She touched her belly, the swell slight but real, life stirring where once there was only emptiness. The plains bloomed, wildflowers dotting the gold, and she walked the fields, wind whispering soft, carrying away the last echoes of abandonment. Asterisk, asterisk, the sun rose gentle over the plains, its light spilling soft across the greening fields, turning dew to diamonds on the grass. Eliza stood at the garden's edge, her hand resting on the curve of her belly, feeling the faint flutter within like a bird testing wings against the shell. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming sage, the wind, a murmur now, not the howl that once drove her to her knees. Caleb worked nearby, mending a fence post, his hammer strike steady, echoing like a heartbeat across the quiet. She watched him, the way sweat gleamed on his neck, the lines of his back familiar as her own scars. Months had woven them together, thread by thread, until the ranch felt less like shelter and more like roots digging deep. The child quickened again, a small kick that drew her breath sharp. She remembered the first time she'd felt at winter's end, snow melting to slush. Caleb's hand pressed to her skin, his eyes wide with wonder. "Ours," he'd said, voice rough with emotion he rarely showed. It wasn't just life. It was redemption, unlikely and hard won, blooming where abandonment had scorched the ground. Her family's letter lay folded in a drawer, unread since that frosty morning, its pleas fading like old ink. Forgiveness had come, not from them, but from within, from the calluses on her hands, the trust in his touch, the land that demanded, but gave back in quiet ways. Afternoons blurred into routine, but laced with new tenderness. She baked bread in the oven's heat, flour dusting her arms, the scent filling the house like a promise kept. Caleb would come in, boots left at the door, and kiss her forehead, his lips chapped from wind but warm. They spoke of names over supper, simple ones like the plains. Anna for a girl, after his mother. Jack for a boy, sturdy and plain. Laughter followed, low and shared, when she teased him about his whittling. The cradle now polished smooth, waiting in the corner like a silent guardian. The dog lay at their feet, tail thumping lazy, and the fire crackled, embers glowing like memories softened by time. But nights brought whispers of the past. She'd wake to the moon's pale glow through the window, heart racing from dreams of dust-choked roads, her family's wagon shrinking to nothing. Caleb would stir, pull her close, his arm heavy and sure. "You're here," he'd murmur, breath warm on her neck, and she'd nod, tracing the scars on his hand marks from wire, from loss, from life unyielding. The fear lingered, a shadow, but smaller now, eclipsed by the light they'd kindled. She thought of Thomas less, his face blurred, a boy's folly against the man beside her. Resilience had reshaped her, not through grand gestures, but small ones. A shared glance across the field, a hand steadied on her back as she bent to weed. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of rose and amber, they walked the perimeter of the ranch. The grass whispered underfoot, cattle lowing distant, a hawk circling lazy overhead. Its cry pierced the air, not swallowed by vastness but part of it, a note in the symphony of the plains. Caleb stopped at the spot where he'd found her, marked now by a cluster of wildflowers, stubborn blooms pushing through cracked earth. "Thought you were gone that day," he said, voice low, squeezing her hand. She leaned into him, the swell of her belly brushing his side. Almost was the words hung, not bitter, but true, a bridge from despair to this. They sat on a rise, the horizon unfolding endless gold-tipped waves of grass rolling to infinity. The wind tugged gentle at her hair, carrying scents of rain far off, promising renewal. She felt the child move again, insistent, and placed Caleb's hand there, his palm rough but tender. His eyes met hers, wary lines softened, a quiet joy flickering like dawn light. No words passed, none needed. The sun sank, shadows lengthening, but the warmth lingered on her skin, a caress where once it had clawed. Years would come, harsh winters and bountiful springs, the child growing tall under the sky, perhaps others following, but in this moment, acceptance settled like dust after storm, peaceful, profound. The weight of shame had lifted, transformed into something enduring, like the land itself. She was no longer a shadow wandering, she was rooted, given everything in the giving back. The horizon stretched endless, a line that promised not emptiness but home.